The solutions we need to save the planet from climate and biodiversity crises are here, but they won't make a difference unless they are adopted at scale. We are Matt Jaworski and Katherine Keddie, and we have focused our careers on ensuring that this happens in time. Back in 2021, we started Adopter, Europe's first marketing company working exclusively with scaling green innovation. Since then, we've supported organisations from pre-seed startups and Earthshot Prize finalists to international unicorns and global NGOs. We've worked with green technology solutions across fintech, construction, food systems, nature and finance, and more. We also mentor on some of the world's leading venture builders. We are on a mission to support 100 high-integrity green innovation solutions by the end of 2025. And 1,000 by 2030. This podcast is the next step on that journey. So, welcome back to the Scaling Green Tech podcast with me, Katherine Keddie, and Matt Jaworski.
Hello.
We are here with Abby and James from Harpswood, who are a brilliant PR agency with lots of experience in climate tech. They were a big part of Octopus Energy journey from an early stage to what they are now, which is a global unicorn. And in today's episodes, we will be discussing the basic tips for climate tech startups trying to get into PR, some experiences and lessons learned along the way, and some things to avoid. So hello, Abby and James.
Hi.
Hi, both. Great to see you.
To kick us off, I'm going to start us with a surprisingly challenging question. How would you explain what you do to a 5-year-old?
How would you explain Harpswood to a 5-year-old? That's a great question in the sense that we always think about simple language, and that's one of the things that we tell clients. And we talked about this in the office yesterday, came up with two people came up with separate ideas on it and came out with exactly the same thing, which is we work with good companies who are trying to tell their stories to people, essentially. That's essentially what we do. We want to work with good companies who are getting their messages across.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that's a good description to get us started, but maybe for the ones who are not a 5-year-old, but maybe, climate tech founders, people that you work with, tell us a bit more about what you do.
Do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. So we work with purpose-driven businesses and we help to raise their profile, making sure that we tell their story to the audiences that they're trying to reach. So everyone from businesses that are starting out, so those early stage companies, perhaps around the seed stage, through to scaling up, Series A, B, and beyond, and then establishing. So Octopus Energy is one of our long-standing clients, and they are firmly in the establishing category. So we now help them across different countries, really help to tell their story in terms of where they need it to be heard.
Okay, and starting with Octopus, I think is really exciting because they've been such a major part of your journey to date. But I would love to hear what your journey has been, both as a company, but also as individuals, and what's brought you to lead you to focus on this particular area of work.
I mean, I think if we go chronologically, unfortunately, I'm going to have to start first by some number of years. 40 odd years ago, I know that I want to be a journalist, and that was kind of all I'd ever wanted to do from the age of about 10 onwards. And I had this love of words, a love of reading, and then latterly a love of news. And then, don't worry, it doesn't go from 10 until like year by year. I'll fast forward a little bit through, get to about 21, 22, been out of university, go travelling, come back, get a job on my local paper, and do that for about a year, just over a year. The Sun launched a graduate training scheme, and I applied for that, and I got on it. And that was a real life-changing moment for me because suddenly I was on a national newspaper. And part of that training scheme was that they put you through City University, which was the top journalism course in the country. So some of the people who were on that course, and it was only 30 people, it was a postgraduate diploma, Faisal Islam, who's now the BBC's economics editor, Pippa Crerar, who's the Guardian's political editor, Leo Lewis, who's the FT's Asia editor, I think. He's certainly out in Japan. Marina Hyde sort of dropped in a few times. She was working on a newspaper at the time, but she would come in and do shorthand law. So there were some real stars of the future on that course, and it was a brilliant, brilliant scheme. Also on it with me on the Sun training scheme was Martell Maxwell, who now presents Homes Under the Hammer and has gone on to have her own sort of amazing career. So some really brilliant people. After that course, which the Sun had funded. I then went on to the paper and I undergo sort of training with them. And I stayed on the paper for 15 years as a junior reporter, junior news desk person, then a more senior reporter who was traveling the world. I think I went to about 35 countries covering various stories from conflict in the Middle East. So 2006, I was out in Lebanon, Virginia Tech massacre out in the States in 2008, I think it was. Live 8, I went to Sudan with Fran Healy from the band Travis, kind of covering those sorts of things. Then I went on the news desk and became head of news. And, you just get this amazing understanding of how news operates and how the media works and how, you're in it and you've got all these PR agencies sending stories into you and you understand why some cut through and why some don't. I think clearly people have their views on the media and certainly on tabloid newspapers, and I don't shy away from that. I think the Sun gave me an ability to write very well, and some brilliant writers have come out of that newspaper. So people who've gone on to write speeches for Bill and Melinda Gates, people who've gone to write speeches for prime ministers in this country. So many of those comms people have come out of newspapers and tabloid newspapers as well. And I think the brilliance of great writing is around, and Philip Collins says this in his book, To Be Clear. And Philip Collins, again, wrote speeches for Tony Blair and also a journalist. And the things that he says you should strive for are absolutely for clarity. And the three things that bring you to that clarity are simplicity, precision, and brevity, which is something that we're always trying to tell our clients.
He's obsessed with words.
Yeah, and obsessed with words and obsessed with keep things really brief, get to the point, keep things absolutely precise. 2015, I leave the Sun, largely for kind of family balance reasons. I had a couple of young children, and we moved out of London. I moved into PR, and I joined a PR agency called PHA, which was run by a former newspaper editor, Phil Hall, absolutely brilliant individual, fantastic agency. And shortly after joining there, I took over a team called the Entrepreneurs and Business Team. And there was a young woman called Abby Smith who was working on that team. And Abby, tell us I would suggest now's a good time to hand over to you, as I've been talking for a long time.
Scary. It's almost 10 years ago now, actually, that we first met. So, it's flown. So I'd actually had a slightly different start to my PR career. I studied English literature, always loved reading, obsessed with books for as long as I could remember. And I didn't really have a super clear vision of where I was going to go career-wise. And I remember someone saying to me once, "You're quite good at talking to people. I think you might be quite good at PR." And I looked into it in a bit more detail. And I actually started out in fashion PR. I think I thought it might be like ab fab, but I was a bit too late really to party there. So I did that for a couple of years. And, it was a real baptism of fire. I was always the kind of person that stuck my hand up and said, give me opportunity, throw it at me. Yes, I'll help you organise this, and was doing all sorts of stuff that really was way above my pay grade, to be honest with you. But after a couple of years, I sort of felt a bit disconnected from the world around me. And a recruiter got in touch and said, have you considered business PR? And it wasn't until I was prepping for that interview with my dad, actually, who had his own business and who I'd grown up around that business my whole life. And I'd actually worked in pretty much every department of that company by the time I went to uni. And it was really through then taking that job, which was at PHA, going into the entrepreneurs and business team and spending much more time with founders and entrepreneurs that I thought, oh yeah, hang on, this is what I'm meant to be doing. I love speaking to them to find out what makes them tick, what's the interesting angle, how can I take that angle and set this founder apart? So many people are pitching journalists for a profile interview. How can you get to know a client? How can you, dig under things a little bit more and unearth a bit of a special story? So I carved out a bit of a niche, I guess, doing that there. And obviously met James. We got on really well. I progressed quite quickly in that agency. Loved broadcast, loved getting clients on TV and onto radio. I think I really liked how fast-paced it was. And I actually ended up going to sort of spread my wings and go and explore a couple of other agencies. And I went to a tech agency for a little bit. And then I was actually at a big global agency called MSL, which is part of Publicis Group, so who own Saatchi & Saatchi, Leo Burnett, quite a big noise. And I was there for a couple of years, and I learned a lot working on big budget campaigns, working with FTSE 100 clients. But in all honesty, I missed being close to the action like I was at PHA.
You don't get the CEO FaceTime, do you?
Exactly. And we had clients there like James Reed of Reed Recruitment, and I had
PHA.
Absolutely, at PHA, and we would put out the Reed Jobs Index every single month and get brilliant coverage. And I loved actually that Monday morning call with James where we'd come prepared with some ideas to talk through and think, okay, what are we going to newsjack this week? Whereas at MSL, because you're working with much bigger clients, there'd be about 7 layers of approval to get anything through. And I'm the kind of person that, I need things to happen more quickly than that, basically. So it was the summer of 2020 that James made the phone call to me.
Is it worth, just to complete
maybe
the story? Yeah. So during the time at PHA, it was a very small team of entrepreneurs in business when we started out, and then it grew as we won business. And I guess that for me was the test from moving to journalism in PR. PR, you've got a lot more commercial responsibilities than you ever really feel as a journalist. And part of those responsibilities was to win new business and to try and generate clients for the agency. And Abby mentioned Reed, which was a big win at the time. That was one that I'd brought in. And then probably early 2017, I'm in classic boring middle-aged dad mode. And changing my energy supplier. And, you're watching household bills and you're making sure that you're on top of everything. And I've gone through one of the switching sites and just spotted that there were dozens of energy companies that I just hadn't heard of before. And because of what I've been doing at The Sun, both as a reporter and news editor, we've been writing a lot of stories about how the big 6 energy companies were not treating customers particularly well. So they were charging them a lot of money. It wasn't great customer service. They didn't really seem to care that much. It was a kind of transactional, you sort of have to go with one of the big 6. I think at the time it was something like 95 or even 99% of people in the country were with the big 6 energy companies. So, there was a choice between these 6 and then not much else. Suddenly you have the deregulation, suddenly lots more new businesses on the market. 70 or 80. And I went into work that Monday and said, look, there's all these new energy suppliers. Some of them are going to need PR to differentiate themselves, and made the point that, some of them will differentiate on price. Some of them will probably differentiate on sustainability. There will be all these angles that they will be looking at. And suggested that we put some feelers out and to see if people were interested. Octopus came back very quickly. And probably within about a day of the email being sent out. And I think it was Greg who responded to the email. And it just so happened that PHA's offices were on Wardour Street. Octopus at that time were on Broadwick Street, just around the corner in Soho. And we went round there. And usually in these sort of pitch meetings, I would be the person going in and doing the hard sell. And I got in there, and the meeting was with me and Greg Jackson, the CEO of Octopus, and Rebecca Dibb-Simkin, who's their marketing chief, head of marketing and product chief, I think. And Greg was selling to me. He was just telling me what an amazing business Octopus was. And he was, just all arms, hugely demonstrative. Took me around the office, would get people saying, now, Pete, tell James what an amazing business Octopus is. Tell him what you've been doing. And I've seen him do this subsequently. He does it to prime ministers, to journalists. And I think probably in an hour's meeting, I probably got about 5 words in. And then I said, well, we'd love to work with you. I'll put a proposal together. And I'd say within 2 weeks, we were working together. And the PHA team were very good. And we had him on the Today programme, I think, within about a month or 6 weeks. And they had some very defined things that they want to talk about. And sustainability was certainly an element of that. But probably the bigger element, I think, was pricing. And they felt that there was a very unfair system of pricing in the UK in the energy market, which I think actually Greg had done an interview with a BBC journalist, and it was the BBC journalist who had coined this term of tease and squeeze. So energy companies would tease you in with a low price, and then you would take your eye off the ball and drift out of contract after a year, and then suddenly they're squeezing you with a very high standard variable tariff. And that was a lot of the work that we did at PHA at the time with Octopus. Around about 2000 and probably summer 2019, I decided that I quite fancied giving PR, setting up an agency myself. I handed in my notice towards the end of 2019, stayed on for a little bit at PHA on a notice period, and then left at the end of February 2020, straight into the pandemic. Which was an interesting time to launch an agency. But by that time, certainly around February, March time, Octopus had said to me that they wanted to come over to the new agency, which was an amazing thing because already by that time they were a successful business. You know, I think when we first engaged with them in 2017, they had about 50,000 customers. And already by 2020, I think they had 1 million customers or 1 million plus customers. So they were a very successful business. It was a great start for the agency. And actually, the minute that we had that contract signed, I rang Abby up and said, do you want to come over and help me run this agency?
Absolutely. And it was really funny. We'd always stayed in touch. And I remember getting this message from James. I knew that he'd started on his own. And I got this message from him saying, are you free for a call tomorrow? And I remember saying to a friend, I'm going to get offered a job tomorrow. And James was a, classic, once a journalist, always a journalist, right? Let me talk and talk. And, the pandemic was challenging, I think, for a lot of people working from home and all of those things. And I think I'd been feeling a bit itchy feet anyway for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, the frustration with those big clients of things not happening at the pace in which I wanted them to happen. And James's sell to me was really simple. He basically said, look, I've started on my own. Octopus are following me over. I want to win more clients like them. I want to do great work with great people. And that's what we do, right? 4.5 years later, it's been an absolutely amazing ride. And, I had quite a long notice period that I had to work out. And I remember the week between leaving the old company and joining Harpswood, I logged on for my first day and we'd won our second client already, hadn't we?
Yeah. And I think obviously this is a sustainability podcast. And I think it's clearly important that we talk about that. The experience, like my own background in sort of views on sustainability and engagement with it, I think I'd probably been a sort of fairly typical person in the UK where, I'd followed the news and I was aware of climate disasters and very aware of them, but also busy and distracted and leading my own life, and while engaging with it and doing the basic things that people will do, like recycling or, things that you sort of think you do, I wasn't tremendously engaged with it. And then I think getting Octopus as a client, and actually that some of the first kind of immersion sessions that we did with them and hearing, Greg is a brilliant communicator, and that's nothing to do with us. He is independent, absolutely brilliant communicator. And he, as we were having this session with him, and he's talking about renewable energy, and he just made this point that I probably knew in the background, but had never really landed with me, that the energy transition in the world of renewable energy, this is not about wearing a hair shirt. This is not about turning all the lights off at night. We've got abundant sunshine and abundant wind, and it's about finding a system that can deal with intermittency and work all that out. But this is a world of, he said at the time, this is a world where we could be paying people to use energy. And like 3 years later, they were. It's like, we've got an abundance of energy on the grid, we'll pay you to do it. This is not about having a worse experience. This is about having a better experience and decarbonising while you do it. And when when that renewable light bulb went off, you just thought, God, this is an amazing business to be working with. It's absolutely the right thing to be doing. That, if you're not doing that, if there is a choice between driving an electric car and a petrol or diesel car, it's like, well, you should, you should make the decision to drive, I think, the electric car. If it has to fit your lifestyle up to a point, but for most people it will. But the technology is better anyway. It's a better drive, and it's about, the products that are on offer are better, so you can do the right thing and have a better customer experience. And I think that when that penny drops, that was, for me, it was like, these are the organisations that I want to work with. This is, the world is moving in this way, and I should use the communication skills that I've got to try and help move it along.
And I think to communicate to the masses as well, right? Which is so key. And I think that second client that I mentioned, so they are called New Automotive. And I think probably quite a lot of people listening to this may well be familiar with their electric car count, which is, it looks at sales of new electric cars, and they put it out each month. And when they came to us, they were really in their infancy. So it was around the time that the 2030 ban on electric and diesel cars was announced. Obviously, as we're time of recording, things are being rolled back slightly, which is problematic in itself, but there we are. And so one of the first things we did for them was a joined up campaign, actually, with Electric Vehicle Association England, Octopus Electric Vehicles, and New Automotive. And a lot of the work that we did around that November, December of 2020 was taking ordinary people's stories who drove electric cars, like this young guy, Harrison from Brighton, who was 17 and he'd vowed he would never drive a non-electric car. And he'd saved up from his part-time job in a supermarket, got this car and just had such pride about it and really wanted to communicate the benefits to everyone as well. And so we were doing things for them like, telling those stories of those everyday people to try and convince and educate and persuade, which is so much of what PR is all about. And then, of course, working with the team at New Automotive, who had brilliant data, their chief exec, Ben Nahms, former policy guy, so really clued in terms of what needed to happen to shift policy and to get things moving in the right direction. And then really from there and through Guy Fernando was how then we sort of ended up taking on more climate tech clients, wasn't it?
That's right. We took on Subak, who Guy was involved with, along with Baroness Bryony Worthington, who I think was the original authors of the Climate Change Act. And Subak essentially is a kind of climate tech accelerator. And, suddenly we're dealing with people like Jack Kelly at Open Climate Fix,
so
who's
smart.
like he's from Google DeepMind, and you're like, wow, how can we live with this guy? How can, what can we tell him? But actually, he understands brilliantly what he does. But, the skill that we can offer is how do you communicate that to, well, how would we describe what they do? Essentially, it's around cloud movement and what happens in the last half an hour, I think, of cloud movement and how that's going to affect solar output. And they were very ahead of the game using AI, machine learning.
Absolutely. And Jack had actually left Google DeepMind to start this new venture, Open Climate Fix. And incredibly smart guy. And I remember quite early on into this project that we were working with them on, setting up an interview for him with Wired. And, I'm there briefing Dr. Jack Kelly, formerly of DeepMind. And I'm thinking, wow, you are so smart. There's so much you know. But of course, there's so much that founders and people who are in the weeds of these really technical businesses don't know about communication. And I think that's where we try to be the bridge between what they're trying to say. And sometimes, we see it, they're too technical and they try and delve in too deeply. And so we try and bring them back up to a level where, it's that sort of, would a smart 12-year-old understand this, right?
Goes back to your original question. It's like, how do you explain it in simple terms?
Exactly. And so, I remember briefing Jack ahead of that Wired interview, sitting in on it, and it turned into this amazing 1,500 word piece in Wired all about their technology and everything they were doing. And they'd actually come to us off the back of they'd won a Google award and had some funding, and we got to work quite quickly sort of saying, well actually that's really interesting and I can understand why you're so excited about that, but this is a theme that we often see with clients where you can sometimes become a little bit clouded by your own agenda rather than thinking, what is a journalist going to want? Whereas the journalist was super fascinated. Who leaves Google DeepMind for a start because you want to be challenged more and you want to have more personal impact on climate, which was the story that he told us. And then, of course, what exactly are you doing? How could this technology transform people's lives? So that was a really good early example. And it was only 2021. The business had been going, probably about 6 months or so at that point. I'm sorry, I count it from when I joined, don't I? Classic. But we were in our infancy.
It's effectively September 2020.
We were in our infancy. And I remember, having this sit-down lunch with Matt Reynolds from Wired. And I'd PR'd all sorts over the years. I'd never managed to get a journalist from Wired to sit down with me. And, we had like 3 or 4 clients at this point. And I remember thinking, this is so exciting. We're really on the right side of things here. And I think a bit like James, I didn't consciously think I'm going to work in climate tech. It's the way that things happened, and having PR'd all sorts of things over the years, truly from launching swimming pools at Butlins to you name it. It's been so exciting to actually wake up each day and now to have a team who are so motivated to work on the clients that we work with. And I think for us, it's about how can we help them accelerate that impact through the work we do.
Totally.
Okay, fantastic. I think, that's a really exciting, comprehensive look at what you do. But I think what lots of people will be very curious to know is going through your experience both in and out of climate tech, and then I'll be seeing that kind of traction that came through working in climate tech and working with those founders. And what I'm hearing is potentially there are stories there that are more interesting to journalists than in other areas. What can other kind of scaling climate tech startups learn from the experiences that you've had? Like, what do journalists want to actually hear from them?
That's a great question. And of course, it's something we talk to our clients about a lot. I think in the earlier stages, it's, when you're running a startup, you're wearing so many hats, right? And you're working so hard to get investment or to deal with your early customers and to hire the right team. We would always say to people, think about your messaging, think about who your audience is, really from the beginning. And then connected to that, what's your elevator pitch? You meet someone in the lift or someone at a party, you want to have those few lines really, really down and to make sure they're consistent as well. We do a lot of media training with clients. I was just going to say
this, yeah. Go on.
Yeah, we do a lot of media training with clients. And one of the first interactive exercises that we get them to do, especially if there's two people from the same company in the room, is we'll ask them the open-ended question.
Tell us about your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so often what you get back is totally different.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. So trying to really nail that down early on. Think about your origin story. We talk about this a lot, and I mentioned it earlier. I think I'm just quite nosy, right? But I always like to understand, where's that light bulb moment come from? Yeah. Why did you create this? How did you solve that problem? Yeah. And again, it's trying to make it personal as well, because it's human interest stories. We're all people at the end of the day, and we care about other people, right? So if you can say something that's going to lodge in someone's mind, you are then more likely to remember it. And then, Kat, I remember one of the first times we met was at that roundtable that I hosted with Juliet from the founder of Climate Connection. And that was an intro to PR and public speaking, right, for early stage climate tech startups. And I remember sitting in that room talking to people from such interesting companies and coming home that night and messaging James and sort of saying, oh my gosh, there's so much we need to do to help the community, because to us, the basics are so simple.
Yeah.
Now, simple doesn't always mean easy, right, James?
True,
in terms of nailing messaging and getting things down in a concise way. But, we often say, have you got the right images? Journalists want strong, memorable images, don't they?
It just makes such a difference. And I think particularly if you are, and a lot of the organisations that we work with will end up often be in the business pages rather than the news pages, if it's around a fundraise or things like that. And, business pages, whether obviously things aren't so much in print now, but largely in digital, but wherever they are, there aren't many great images around business. It's like often lots of men in suits, or, should be more women, but make an interesting picture, find something that isn't just you signing a document or standing there with a headshot and you do that, and you will cut through. That will make a massive difference.
And we've seen that, I think, with some of our clients. So Packfleet, all-electric van delivery company. And Steve, who's in our team, another former journalist, he's got a brilliant eye for strong images and what makes a good story. And quite early on into working with them, he looked at their photos and thought, hang on a minute, you're based in London, you're wanting to attract more merchants of small businesses to come and use us so that Packfleet would deliver their products. Why have we not got photos of Packfleet vans in eye-catching London locations?
The whole thing was about them being electric vans, that was the differentiator.
Yeah, and so we helped them organise a photo shoot, and we had, the Packfleet van in Chinatown with the London Eye behind it, and all really sort of eye-catching locations. And then any stories we put out for them time and time again, you'd get those visuals in. And Yogo's another quite
Yogo was amazing. So we did some work with, so it's essentially kind of like golf buggies that they're using in Hammersmith and Fulham as kind of short little travel options, and they're bright yellow. They look amazing. The photos look fantastic, and the work that we did with them, I think we ended up on the BBC, Times, Telegraph, Guardian. I mean, it was like every sort of mainstream national. It was incredible, and it was because of those images. That's absolutely what cut through.
100%. And then I think we often say to clients or prospective clients, make sure you've got your facts and figures in order as well. You don't need to overdo it. You don't want to bamboozle people that you're talking to with stats and stats and stats, but one or two well-placed stats, one or two well-placed illustrations or examples of, our first customer was so-and-so, and we helped them by doing this, and they've said to us they've seen a reduction in their costs or their energy savings, and just make it again relevant and memorable. I think
about the message, think about the example, and you're absolutely right on stats. It's like what one or two is absolutely fine, but you can, if you'll hear someone on the Today programme, and if they come out with sort of 7 or 8 stats, even if you're paying attention, you're lost.
Yeah.
And most people aren't paying attention. think one other thing I'd say is that some, and it's perfectly natural, some clients that will advise will sort of say, we've landed that message, we've done that. And it's like, actually, you need to be a little bit like politicians where you are sick of hearing the message. You have to repeat and repeat and repeat because, as we said, we've had a client this morning as we record on BBC Breakfast. Now, they've talked about a particular issue. It will have raised their profile a bit, but some people will have been watching that, will have noticed. Vast majority of people will be making their breakfast, eating their porridge, doing whatever they're doing, and they'll sort of be flitting in and flitting out of it. It's like you need to keep going. It has to be this steady profile raising, message landing, and don't be afraid to repeat those messages time and time again.
And I think don't be afraid to test them out as well, right? And we've actually been looking this year at what other services we can offer to clients and earlier stage companies, because so often, as we've spoken about, when something's very technical or you've got this amazing deep engineering expertise or whatever it is you specialize in, of course you're not going to be able to write as well as James, who's spent how many decades doing it. It's like that would be crazy. And so I think, look to people who can give you good advice. Know that even the most brilliant communicators didn't become brilliant overnight, right? It takes work, it takes effort, it takes the ability to say, okay, I'm going to watch that interview back. How could I have improved it?
Yeah.
And to constantly be learning and evolving. I think that's so key. And so for us, I think I mentioned earlier, we've recently become a community partner to Climate Connection. So they're an amazing organisation, of course. You'll know you're a community partner too. And they are so fantastic. And what Juliet's created to bring the community together, really with the idea of how can we help each other. At the flagship events on the last Wednesday of a month, when you have to talk to someone you've not met before and you say, what's your current challenge and how can I help you? I think that really speaks to the heart of everything, right, that we're all trying to achieve. And part of our work with them is running office hours, so where startups can come and meet us, chat to us. It was like sort of rapid fire PR questions, wasn't it? Last time we did it, it was brilliant.
Pretty intense, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It was great, but it's really good to be challenged in that way. And off the back of that, and through talking to their team, we've created a bunch of different workshops. So everything from mastering your messages through to founder focus. What's that unusual founder story that you can then use to tell your story, whether it's on LinkedIn or when you're speaking to journalists, and also running things like DIY PR as well. So helping companies to get some of these basics that we've been mentioning. So your boilerplate, which is your short paragraph with your key stats and facts and figures about the business. The fact sheet, we've got a Harpswood tried and tested fact sheet model that we roll out for clients, which just makes sure that you've got everything in order. So often getting the basic PR elements is a bit of housekeeping, to be honest. It doesn't always sound that glamorous, but it's actually really important, because if a journalist comes to you and asks for some quite simple info about your business, but you're scrambling around trying to get it, and then you don't get it to them very quickly, that journalist probably isn't going to come back to you very quickly again, because they're time poor, they're juggling lots of things. So by getting these basics down, getting your PR foundations in order, joining some of our workshops, as I mentioned, all of that just means you set yourself up for success.
And when it comes to, as a climate tech founder, when I'm deciding what is the right time for me to invest in PR, because obviously it's a big decision to make, it comes at a stage where you're going to get kind of a level of traction to it. How big were Octopus when you started working with them? And then what do you think is the right moment for a founder to decide now is the time to invest in my PR versus what I can do myself?
I mean, Octopus initially, I think they'd had £10 million worth of funding. And, I think at that scale, you clearly have some budget to invest in marketing, and you have things to say. I think if you are pre-seed, chances are you probably haven't got a product that's deliverable, or you haven't got a service that's necessarily ready to go. So, you probably are realistically looking at DIY stuff. I think at seed stage, then again, it depends on what the level of that seed round is. And I think it does depend a degree to what type of product and service it is. And also the type of audience that you are speaking to. And the founder is probably the best place to judge, do I really need to, the vast majority of businesses do need to communicate to an audience, whether it's to raise more investment, or whether it's around government policy, or whether it's general profile raising. But we would say, I think generally between probably seed and Series A is the general time that we see people starting.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, we were with a really fascinating business just last week, and I can't say who they are because they've actually not put their head above the parapet yet, but they're doing incredible things. British manufacturing business could totally transform an industry if it goes in the direction we think it will. And they said, you know what, we've intentionally not done any PR. They've had some customers approach them and they've said, you know, we want to do press releases, and they've made the decision not to. Well, fast forward to the point where they are now, where they're fundraising and investors are turning around to them and are saying, well, why have we not heard about you? And I think so often it's chicken and egg, right? Because, of course, in the earlier stages, businesses are really concerned, what's the runway looking like? You know, they've got potential investors scrutinizing the books, all of that stuff. But I think equally, we know from experience that PR is about validation, third-party validation, right? And the ability for an investor to do that checkbox exercise of a quick Google search. Have they been in Sifted? Can I see anything about them in TechCrunch? Have they been commenting on issues that are relevant to their business? Do they understand their industry and their position within it, right? And so actually it's so important. And I think at the earlier stage as well, businesses can be bolder, and they can have perhaps a stronger opinion than you can when you've got, you know, much broader range of investors, you know, sort of scrutinizing you. So I think the earlier the better, but equally we would never promise something that we didn't feel we could deliver. You know, this is something we talk about quite a lot within the PR industry. I think there's quite a lot of people out there that like to promise the moon on a stick and don't always deliver, and we try to take quite the opposite approach to that, don't we?
Under promise and over deliver. And I mean, just to pick up on that third party validation point, I think that, you know, that really is the key to PR. I think that, you know, some people, some very intelligent people, you know, their world is not marketing and advertising, social, PR, it all kind of blends into one, and that they all absolutely have their role. But I think if you land a great piece of PR, it can change things in a way that an advert and even a great social post probably can't. That idea that, you know, a journalist has looked at your product or service, they've scrutinized it, you know, they've wrestled with it, they've pulled you apart a bit to find out, you know, where are the weaknesses in it, and then they have concluded that actually this is an amazing product that could have a significant impact on the world, or whatever it is they conclude at the end that is positive. That has a tremendous amount of impact, because it's not you saying it, it's the journalist who's saying it. Is, you know, it's what's being said about you after you've left the room. That's what PR is. And you know, some of the results that we've seen, I think the acid test for us is when the founder comes on and says, I had my mum on the phone. She read the piece in the the minute that happens, you know that you've got that client forever.
Totally. Well, I remember Sarah from Aim High, right? So Aim High are a brilliant organisation who deliver climate training online. And Sarah, one of the co-founders, was interviewed for The Times all around their funding. Now, they'd received 1 million in funding, which to them, huge amount of money, really exciting, but to a journalist, not a huge figure, right?
Certainly a journalist who's dealing with lots of funding stories.
Absolutely. And the way that we packaged it up was to talk more about the business, build out that wider narrative around it, talk about the companies that they've worked with, and just to sort of make it a bit bigger than that figure itself. And it resulted in this really fantastic piece in The Times. And Sarah let one of our team know that in her family WhatsApp chat, the whole thing was just absolutely popping off because her brother had been in a coffee shop, saw someone reading The Times, looked over and thought, that's my sister, and like a half-page huge photo of her. But it's that sort of thing that we hear about time and time again. Or, you know, you get a client on TV and you know, again, someone that they know, people they've worked with, or even their customers and things like that see them. It's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Abby had an amazing result with Desert Island Discs, which, you know, I think is the absolute, I mean, it's the zenith of media. You know, once you're on Desert Island Discs, you are very much, you know, you are part of, you've made it, I think. And yeah, a conversation with the producer led to Greg Jackson going on there. And it was, you know, it just feels like something that is just, it makes a difference. It really makes a difference in terms of how you're perceived, how where your standing is, I guess, and your authority.
Absolutely. And I think for other companies that we've worked with, so Naked Energy are a long-standing client of ours. They're a solar thermal business, and we've worked with them for 3 years now, and we've supported them through their Series B fundraise, and everything was gearing up actually to a big landmark project that they've been working on with the British Library. And that was quite a complicated one in that there was a lot of people involved. It required sort of quite careful consideration for how we presented it. And it was such an exciting moment actually for our team to get the results that we wanted on that. So, and I think it's quite a good example of where PR doesn't always go in the way that you think it might, but how when you've got the expertise, you can navigate it. So we'd agreed an exclusive with the Times, and then we'd managed to get a broadcast exclusive away with BBC London. And with the Times, the client was really happy. They were quite keen to have a print exclusive. We discussed online targets and things, but they really wanted that outlet. And in the end, it actually got edited down quite considerably, and the piece was much smaller than we'd all been hoping for. The team found out very quickly, actually on a Sunday, ahead of it due to go out on the Monday. They knew that a journalist that we know quite well at Bloomberg was probably going to be quite interested in it, got to work, arranged an interview for the CEO with that Bloomberg journalist. And actually, we ended up getting a little bit in the Times and a big Bloomberg piece. And then we also managed to get the story on BBC London for this huge broadcast piece where they went down, filmed, interviewed the CEO. And I think that is just such a good example of the contacts that we have within the agency and being able to make sure that, we can never guarantee. I think that's the thing with PR that sometimes people that haven't had an experience of it don't always understand, because we can't dictate to a journalist what they write. Our role is to facilitate between the two.
To make them interested.
Absolutely. And to present our clients in the best possible light, and also to present it in a way that's going to excite the journalist. Because I think sometimes founders and people within a business can be so obsessed with their business that they can get a bit lost for what is actually newsworthy or what a journalist is keen to receive. And that BBC piece for Naked Energy was just such an amazing TV op. Yeah. We were so determined because it was such a visual story, iconic British location, the biggest installation of solar thermal collectors in the UK, a listed building, so all the complications that come with that. But we know how important it was for them to achieve that. And we know for future projects, they've got a lot of exciting things coming up. You then build the momentum for clients through landing pieces like that. So I
think the other thing I'd say with that particular piece of coverage, it really brought home to me how Harpswood had developed as a business, because we had Eva Lightfoot running it, who's been with us for 2 years now, ex-BBC journalist, been at BBC for 6 years, and she was down there advising the client in the British Library when that was being filmed. And you think, we've really got great level of expertise now within the business where she can advise them much better than I can advise. I can advise well on written words and I can advise a bit on TV, but the person who's got the TV expertise, that's fantastic to have. And I think that's the way we see the business developing.
Totally, 100%. And then I would just add on that question of how early is too early for clients. So we have also been doing PR for Juliet, the founder of Climate Connection. Now, they're an organisation that hasn't taken funding, right? It's community-led, it's been bootstrapped, and it's really grown through word of mouth and through everything that they do for the community. And that's a really exciting one for us because she has a great personal story to tell, but it's not that they're a business that's worth millions, right? It's more actually that they're doing something quite different and they're facilitating conversations that are interesting and topical to journalists. So really early on into working together, they let us know that they were doing an event on first-of-a-kind funding, which is super topical, really, really interesting, and frankly, a huge problem, right? And so Pete from our team identified this as, yes, this is something that could be interesting to a journalist, and managed to get Freya from Sifted to go down to this event. She loved it because she got to listen in to all these really interesting conversations happening with investors and founders, and then ended up getting a little write-up in the Sifted newsletter, which for Juliet and Climate Connection is a big deal, right? Because that's exactly the type of outlet that their audience is trying to reach. So I think really for us, it's about understanding who is the business trying to reach? What is the business trying to do? Making sure that the PR objectives are really aligned to the business objectives, because our PR should help the business to scale. And there's nothing more than we love than being involved early on and taking part on that journey with them as they grow. It's so exciting.
It is. It is.
Something you touched on is, right, the difference that good framing, good PR approach and understanding journalists makes in getting them interested in your story. I was wondering if you could share an example of, sort of raw story that is great, but it's not going to appeal to journalists, And then a couple of examples on the difference, right? Having the PR experience can make to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really interesting question, Matt. I think often we have organisations, and Abby's alluded to this before, and this is a common trap to fall into, I think, where you're so wrapped up in your own organisation that what we're able to bring is that sense of perspective. And I think sometimes there's a great acid test for a client that, if one of your competitor businesses was writing this story, or if any other business in any other sector was writing this story, would you read it? Would you be interested? Are people interested in your company rebrand? I mean, maybe if you're a massive, if you're Apple, perhaps, but if you're a smaller startup, then probably not. I think I saw a really interesting post the other day on LinkedIn, actually, from Jane Hamilton, who's an ex-colleague of mine. She works on The Sun and she also works on The Times now. And she had said that, journalists are busy and they haven't got time to be reading an intro in a press release that's talking about your sort of waffly company mission. You've got to get to the point really, really quickly. So I'm just trying to think of a good example of where we have done that. You've got the intersecting sets, and this, what we're always trying to find, I guess our whole role really is you have the journalist on one side, you have the client on the other side, and we are trying to find that kind of intersecting set of what is interesting to the journalist and what is the right message for the client to get across.
In the media, there are regular profile slots, so you'll have read them and seen them. And there's one called BBC CEO Secrets that at the time was run by Dougal Shaw. Now, I knew Dougal quite well. I'd landed quite a few interviews in that slot with different clients previously at PHA. So from one who was a client who I'd discovered was into cave diving, and I'd used how he takes his approach of, needing to be calm and really, taking everything he learns from doing that to how he runs his business. And it's not that they want to hear about the business itself. He really wanted that anecdote, that secret that the audience would take away and be able to perhaps put into practice. And I remember hearing anecdotally in the early days of working with Octopus that they didn't have a traditional HR department. And I remember thinking, that's so interesting. I've never really heard of that. At the time, they were worth around 2 billion. And I remember saying to them, have you had Greg on BBC CEO Secrets before? And they said, no, we haven't. So I pitched it. I led with the angle of my business had no HR department, and actually it worked. And I remember when the piece went out, it went a bit crazy, to be honest with you. It ended up being in the BBC News app that day. I think it went up to number 2 at one point, which was really exciting, wasn't it? Yeah. And Greg, the founder of Octopus, his LinkedIn pretty much exploded with people applying for jobs and getting in touch. And I think we actually had him do some global media off the back of it. And for quite a lot of interviews following that, people really wanted to know, well, how does it work? And of course, they have people there looking after their teams and doing tons of things, but they just don't approach HR in a traditional way. And I reference that because I think it goes to show you have to understand what the journalist wants and give them the information in the right way. When it comes to dealing with journalists who are bombarded with information, you've got to give it to them in the right way. And we do a lot at Harpswood of having journalists into our office. We have a series called Harps Meets. And so we have brilliant journalists come in, sit down with the team, often will show us just how many hundreds, if not thousands of emails they have in their inbox every single day. And we say to them, what works for you? What do you like? And quite often we will work with a journalist on a story. When we know someone well enough, it's often a phone call or it's a WhatsApp.
And that goes to that point, actually, that, often a press release isn't the right approach. It's about a conversation with a journalist and, just running a bit of the information past them. So, does this sound like one for you? It feels like something that, I don't know, the Sunday Times magazine might go for. Yeah. We've got some good pictures with it for online. We've got some great video for it. We know you're looking more digital now. And then they'll have a sensible conversation with us. And then I think rather than that, and we don't do this, but there's a lot of agencies I think still do that kind of spray and pray approach where you just send out loads of press releases and hope that something sticks. It's like, be targeted, understand what the journalist wants, understand what the top line is in the story. I think another thing, and I think that my news background gives us this as an agency, is to understand nothing happens in isolation. Everything happens within the context of what is going on within the rolling news period. So, one thing that we'll do as an agency is everyone reads online papers for half an hour every morning so that we understand what's going on. And then when you're working with a client, so perhaps let's say New Automotive, for example, when they're coming out with a lot of data about what's been happening in the EV market over the last month or the last quarter, you understand the stories that are going on in the background. You understand what the different journalists are writing about. So if we were doing it now, you might take a look at what's happening with Jaguar Land Rover, because we know that they've just stopped exporting to the States, I think, because of the tariffs. You need to understand what is happening within the news sector to know what that top line is going to be. And it might not necessarily be the line that the client always wants to get across, but you have to get that balance right. Because we know you want to land this message, but if you lead with that, you might not get interest. So we might need to lead with this and then land the message secondarily. And then we're satisfying what the journalist wants, the kind of hot news angle, but also satisfying what the client wants with getting that message across.
Absolutely. And I think, as James said, the Jane Hamilton example on LinkedIn is a great one. It's not just Jane out of all the journalists out there that are doing this. We hear it through conversations with them all the time, of the amount of press releases or the amount of emails that journalists get from companies that just simply aren't news. And so I think it is really important that companies actually consider, could I imagine this being written? If I was on the BBC News app, or I was getting my Sifted newsletter or TechCrunch newsletter, whatever it is you read in the morning, if I'm looking on Business Screen or on ED, could I imagine this story on the homepage? And if not, then perhaps that story is actually better as a blog. Perhaps it's better to use when you're next on a podcast. And yes, that award could be really amazing for you internally with your people and your team, and you should be so proud of it. But does it really warrant a press release? We'll sometimes say to clients, that's fantastic. That's a proof point. And actually what we are going to pitch is this because of X, Y, and Z. And we're going to put that line about your award win or about this new development. We'll let them know about it, but it's not going to be the top line. It's going to be a little bit lower.
Yeah, totally.
Something you touched on a few times, right? Are press releases, how sometimes they're just sprayed to many journalists and someone is praying that someone might pick it up. I was wondering if you would like to elaborate a bit more on this topic. So what are some misconceptions and mistakes related to press releases? And what would be some best practices relevant to them? And what's their role and place in the PR mix of a company?
This is therapy for James.
So I think they still have a place. I think they are still an effective way to communicate. I think, I left The Sun 10 years ago. At that time, there's still hundreds of thousands coming in every day into generic releases. I say to the team whenever they start, and to any client, journalists will read the headline. They might read the intro, the first line of the press release. That's it. They are not going to read more than that. So if you don't know that, and you do what's called a sort of delayed drop intro, where you kind of delay, and then get the point halfway down the press release, it's just not going to be read. I mean, it is just not going to be read. And unless you've got a contact who you can ring and say, I'm putting this out, but probably if you can't write a press release like that, you're probably not going to know that many people in the media. So I think it's about, you are not writing stuff in chronological order. You are writing stuff in the order of importance. It's the way that a news story is written. It's that, they always call it the inverted triangle, where the most important thing goes at the top, and then the less important, there has to be a flow, and you have to get your quotes in and things like that. But the most important bit's got to go at the top. I think, the golden rule at journalism college was that you couldn't write an intro that was over 30 words. And that's something that I tell the team again. You have to keep words crunched down. There's something that was always thrown at The Sun as an insult. It was this idea that, people weren't allowed at The Sun to write words longer than 2 syllables. And it was seen as this great funny joke. And I understood why. It wasn't true, but it said a lot about the people making the joke. There's nothing wrong with simplicity. There is nothing wrong with brevity. These are things that we should strive for, and you can hit great impact with the most economical of language, and that's where people go wrong. The most common mistake is that people write press releases that go on and on and on, and they're just hundreds and hundreds of words, and it's just not going to be read. It's just, total waste of everyone's time. And I think something that is interesting to me is that we're using AI within the business, and all for that. Any way that we can make things efficient. Some of the AI generated press releases that I see, and you can tell pretty quickly which ones are. I think the ones at the moment, and I have no doubt that it will improve, but I think it's almost falling into the trap of, we need long words, and that's not what you need, and obviously it's rubbish in, rubbish out. So if you're asking the wrong questions or you're setting up the wrong filters, then that's what's going to come out of it. But I think you still need great writers, and by great writers, I mean people who do keep things brief, keep things simple, keep things precise. And those are the mistakes.
100%. And I think as well, it's not just that press release, it's what are you doing with that press release once you've put it out?
Yeah.
And again, I think there's a lot of agencies out there, or, there's even databases where you just put it in and it gets sent out, right? Whereas for us, if we ever say to a client, we're selling in for you, right? So selling your story to the media, that is so much more than just sending a press release out on email. That is going through the agency's collective little black book. Who do we know? Who would be most interested?
Who's been writing
about it? Exactly. Actually, that person at this title, they much prefer WhatsApp. I'm going to ping them a WhatsApp, see if they got 2 minutes, jump on the phone. When you get on that phone call, the first 30 seconds of that conversation with the journalist is so important. Yeah. What are you trying to say? Why should they listen? They're so time poor. There's increasingly less journalists out there and way more PRs, right? So you have to make it count. So I think that's really important. And going back to the language point, we actually have a list of banned words at Harpswood. Utilise being one of them. Just say use.
Just say use. Yeah.
Leverage. Strategic partnerships. When you see that in a press release, and you
reach out.
Exactly. And what are you trying to say? And I think it's sometimes a bit of a hangover from the university days where people have to use really flowery language to get a certain word count.
To hit a word count,
exactly. And so for us, we've got a team of really talented people in our organisation. However, I would say even the best writers, you come out of uni and there is a bit of an unlearning to be done if you go into the world in which we work.
The sort of the swallowing of the thesaurus.
Yeah,
it's like we need to slightly undo that, just go back to the simplicity.
Exactly. And I think simplicity is a really good and useful point to make, actually, when we're talking about how to engage journalists, because press releases absolutely have a role. I remember in my first PR job, the person running it was sort of like, press releases are dead, like no one wants them anymore. But equally, journalists are time poor. And if you've got a well-written press release that a journalist can lift and repurpose without having to rewrite it too much themselves, especially in more trade publications or, in teams where they're a bit smaller, they will use that pretty much verbatim sometimes from what we've given to them. So it goes back to make it easy for the journalists so that they have, more reasons to cover the story that you're trying to land. I would also say that sometimes it's not a press release. Sometimes it's a really well-written pitch. And by that, we mean a very short email. Often we love to have bullet points in there, get that key information really high up, keep it short, make it attention grabbing, make the subject line matter. I don't pitch as much now, obviously, because we're running the business and, we're working more on our global expansion and things like that. But when I was pitching day in, day out, I loved a dramatic, punchy subject line. I think that's probably what worked for me with Desert Island Discs in the end. I think it was something like heat pumps to heavy metal is what I used for that for Greg Jackson.
I just think I remember one for Sustainable Ventures. So Sustainable Ventures, great business. They are a VC with climate tech. So they invest in climate tech. They also have their own workspace at County Hall, and a big workspaces business. All the workspaces made out of sort of renewable materials. And part of our role with them was to try and get journalists to come along to the workspace and have a look at it and see all the different businesses work within there. And somebody who was quite junior, who just started at Harpswood, to sort of put together a pitch, and it was quite wordy and the subject line was quite long. And it was kind of end of the day, and I was looking at it and I was thinking, I know who I need to pitch this to who might be interested, but that subject line is all wrong. Sustainable Ventures are at County Hall, which is where Ken Livingstone used to operate from in the GLC in the 80s. And he was universally known as Red Ken because he was seen as being on the pretty far left wing. So I very quickly put together Red Ken to Green Den and sent that in the subject line, and it's suddenly you get a response straight away. People are, if you take the time and you can come up with something that's a bit punchy and a bit interesting, and it's not to everyone's taste, but it does grab the attention. They matter. These 100%. Things really matter.
And actually, another sustainable ventures example that I love is someone from our team had read an article by a journalist at the FT where she'd referenced, I think it was George Orwell, wasn't it? And he's a prolific reader, and so got this reference, and then responded to her with a pitch about sustainable ventures and referenced, I think, George Orwell in the subject line.
That's right.
And again, not
Yeah.
only did she reply, but she ended up speaking to one of the co-founders at Sustainable Ventures, and it ended up in this amazing piece in the FT where they'd drawn this image of County Hall, which is this new sustainable workspace with all these amazing climate tech companies working within it, with all these green leaves coming out of this amazing old building. And I think that just goes to show that attention to detail, doing your homework, knowing who you're contacting is so important. I can understand why companies want to DIY PR in the early days sometimes. And I completely accept that sometimes that's what you need to do to get things moving. But being able to have the knowledge and the expertise to understand what's going to get a journalist to open that email is so key. And I think something else that we've not touched on, when we were talking the other day, we were talking about how sometimes people starting out can run the risk of contacting journalists that are way too senior for the story that they're sending. When you pull a media list from online, making sure that it's not the overall editor of the paper that's on there that you're contacting, go to the relevant person. And I think equally, if you're pitching a broadcast story, I know Tim Collins at the Jeremy Vine show of Radio 2 really well. Great guy. He's the editor there, has been there a long time. I would never call Tim just before the show was about to go live, because he's going to be sorting out anything last minute. He's going to be prepping Jeremy with the guests that are coming on for the day. You would never pitch a show that's about to air or while they're on air. Know the shift patterns, learn who you're trying to pitch, and then the right time of trying to get through to them as well is so key.
We've had quite a few good to-dos and we've had some things to avoid. I want to go back a little bit to your list of banned words, because something that we do when we're going through pitch decks or we're developing copy for websites is we go through and we try and pick out any kind of buzzwords. And I think especially when you're early stage, maybe you have a technology startup, it's quite easy to fall into that trap. And particularly for a journalist, I would imagine simplicity is key, as you said. So looking at that banned word list, what else is on there for Harpswood?
Utilise, as we have said, that is an absolute verboten for us. Just use, and I think we will see it repeated and repeated throughout press releases. I think leverage, or leverage if you're American. If you're using it strictly in the terms of leveraging money and investment, then fair enough. Otherwise, again, it's just use. Keep it simple. One of my pet hates is the use of going forward, because time by nature is going forward. You don't have to specify it. Reaching out is one that I don't like. There's a brilliant meme out there which says, should I use reach out? And then there's a little flow chart and it says, are you a member of the Four Tops? Yes, you can use it. No, don't use it. And I love that. I think that's I'm often telling the team that. What else have we got on there?
I think circling back.
I
think that might be from when you were on the other side and you had too many PR people saying, just circling back on this story.
I think you sort of drift into business jargon there as well. And there's a lot of that absolutely doesn't need to be used.
Yeah.
One thing, it's not so much a banned word as a phrase that I always wince at when I was on the Sun news desk, and you would do a run of 8 or 9 days of 12-hour days. And then you get a chunk of time off at the end, but you'd be in the middle of this and you'd get an email from a PR that you didn't know and it'd say, hey, happy Friday. And you're like, I'm working for the next 5 days solid. This is not a happy Friday, trust me. So I think it's kind of understanding how those, that not everyone is having a long weekend off. Some people will be working through it. So that's the knowledge thing, I guess, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think beyond specific words, from a style perspective, make sure it's active. Grab someone's attention, keep it short, keep it snappy, make every word count. I'm not half as talented a writer as James is, right? He is exceptional. However, I would say through spending so much time with him over the, however many years it's been now.
Rattling on about things.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I now can look at something and, it's funny, even when we're hiring at Harpswood and I'll get a CV through and I'm like, oh God, they've used utilise really high up in this CV. I better not show James. Because it's so funny that people do it so often.
I think it comes down to university again. And I just think this idea of, it's just become like, this is how you write, this is good writing to use. And you see people coming into the industry, particularly into PR, actually less so in journalism, where they start to use this business language because they're copying other people. And I think actually there is a problem within probably agency life where, you need to communicate in a way that people understand. And I think often PR agencies can be guilty of using so much jargon themselves that clients don't fully understand it. And, what a terrible indictment of the industry that is. You've got to be talking in really clear and simple ways. And when we launched Harpswood and put together the website, I interviewed 3 people who I thought were brilliant communicators. So one was Tom Fletcher. He was the year below me at school. He's now he's the UN's top humanitarian person. He's a brilliant communicator. He's written a book called The Naked Diplomat, which is all about communicating. He was Britain's youngest ambassador out in Lebanon. And I said to him, what's the worst crime in writing? And he said, jargon, acronyms. Don't write an acronym. Don't, if you, actually, this goes back to something that I was told at The Sun, never write something that you can't explain. If you've written a piece and someone says, well, what does that sentence mean? Well, I don't really know. It's like, why have you written it? You have to understand what you've written. If you write an acronym and you don't know what it stands for, why have you written it? I interviewed Michael Lee, who's an ex-Sun journalist who went on to write for Bill and Melinda Gates at their foundation. He would write speeches for them. And again, he said acronyms. Same with Jodie Ginsberg, who became CEO of Index on Censorship. It's like, don't use jargon, don't use... And good writers, really good communicators, they all know it's like, keep it really simple and don't use a word because it's longer or it's more flowery or, you're not doing your English degree. You're trying to be as clear as you possibly can.
And I think how you communicate and, there are mixed feelings about the PR industry. I think that's fair to say.
Yep.
And I think we've definitely felt like that at times ourselves. And I think in running Harpswood and growing the agency, we always try to take a different and hopefully better approach for both our clients and our team. And something that we both have a bit of a pet peeve with is we'll look to, and it's like, what do you mean? You'll either do it or you won't. And just do it.
Exactly.
And that, forever blows our mind. If you're going to do something, just say you're going to do it and then see it through. And I think probably the reason why we feel so passionate about that is our tagline for a long time was can-do communications, right? And when we talk to our clients and, we get them to share their experiences of other agencies versus what they've found working with us, the thing that always comes back from them is that we will make things happen for them. And by that, I mean, if a story's not landing, we will turn over every stone until we find the right journalist for that story. Or if, we had an example of a client who we'd got them a piece of coverage and they needed a headshot and he wasn't happy with his headshots. He was in Barcelona. Our team arranged a photographer to have his headshots taken at 9 a.m. the next morning. This was at like 4 p.m. I think the day before. And look to and seek to make it happen.
Don't caveat stuff. Like make stuff happen.
Absolutely.
We had, on that kind of can-do spirit, when we started working with Sustainable Ventures, we'd just signed the contract with them and they've made us sign an NDA, which is not unusual. And they said, the reason for the NDA is that in 3 days' time, we've got Prince William touring the office and we want you to help us plan it. And we were like, okay, we'll come in on that. Now, of all the jobs that I'd ever done at the paper, I never thought that I did a year as the royal correspondent. I thought that would probably be the least transferable and the least usable. And then suddenly it's like, actually, this is now really useful that I had this experience. So we knew that probably the most important thing with any story like that is going to be the pictures, and if the pictures make, then that's going to get the story and you'll land the messages that you want to land. So I think Abby and some others on the team did the tour before the prints had arrived, in the days up to it, to make sure where are the good pictures going to be. And Sustainable Ventures is right opposite the Houses of Parliament. You've got a lovely window that kind of frames Parliament. And now, I'm sure Sustainable Ventures would have figured this on their own, but we were very clear that, this has got to be your top priority to work out where these pictures are taken. And then at the other end of things, once the tour had been done, which was very successful, and the Prince of Wales met lots of these great startups, we knew that the most important thing was to get the permission from the palace that we could use certain pictures so that we could start getting press releases out on behalf of Sustainable Ventures with pictures that had been signed off. So we made sure that one of our team was right by the palace press office the whole time. And as they left the building, went through the pictures with them, because otherwise they can disappear off and then you can't get them on the phone. And then suddenly you've lost a day with getting these things out. So it's definitely that attitude of we can help, we can get started straight away, we know what we're doing, we've got the experience. And yeah, we're not going to look to do this. We're going to actually do it, and we're going to help you, and we're going to make things work.
Absolutely. I love that example. That was such an exciting day. We hadn't even had an immersion session with them yet, right? So I remember running around the building, moving plant pots and, just being classic Abby Smith, basically, and rolling my sleeves up and doing what needed to be done. We had a whole heap of the team there, each of us on different roles, all of us scattered around the building so that we could monitor the tour, making sure that we were listening for any useful little bits of information that Prince William said when he was meeting the startups. And then not only did we have brilliant photos, which we made sure we got approved when the press team came back through ahead of leaving, we also got them to approve the copy to accompany the photos with references of Sustainable Ventures, our client, in it. And that meant that between the brilliant press release that we drafted ahead of the tour, with the brilliant photos, with the captions, with the approval, as soon as the Prince was leaving the building, we were emailing out the press release and the photos, which meant coverage started to come in thick and fast on that day. And I think that's where, when companies are thinking, do I need an agency? I think that's a really good example of James is rather unusual. Not everyone has worked as a real correspondent, but that experience was invaluable.
Well, I knew some of the people who were there on the day and could say to them, what else is happening? And they were like, well, Kate's been out this morning, so that might be the big royal story of the day. And you've got to kind of factor that in. But it's definitely a connections business in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And then speaking with the startups ahead of Prince William, going around and meeting them, making sure that they had that all-important elevator pitch down. You might not have too long with someone like that, just in the way that you don't have long when you speak to a journalist. So make that first interaction count. What have you got there to show him? I remember one of the startups had some prototypes of their product there. Again, brilliant, because that meant he could pick it up, interact with it. It's a visual aid, which is so useful when you're speaking to either a journalist or a high-profile visitor like that. But I think that really is at the core of who Harpswood is. I think that story.
Absolutely.
I think that example is also really interesting and relevant for a climate audience because of the Earthshot Prize, which obviously Sustainable Ventures is a nominator. It's very relevant to our space.
Absolutely. And on the day that Prince William went round and met a bunch of really interesting companies, one of them was Enzo, who actually was a finalist for the Earthshot Prize and doing incredible work to try and decarbonise tyres on vehicles. I think they've actually since partnered with Uber and are doing really brilliant work in the space. And I think it's amazing, actually, awards like that to really shine a spotlight on all of the brilliant innovation that's happening globally with climate tech and these incredible companies that we have the opportunity to work with. It's so exciting.
And you guys work all over the world as well, which isn't something we've talked about. Where do you have offices? And also in those geographies, how does your approach to PR, particularly when it comes to climate tech, differ?
So as of 2023, we expanded internationally, which was such an exciting moment for us, and in quite an unusual way, actually, that came about. So we were actually asked to expand internationally by Octopus. And so we made key hires in Houston, in Texas, because that's where Octopus are based in the US. And then also in Munich in Germany. And that's been incredible. Since then, they've been so happy with that we actually expanded into Italy as well. So we have a teammate who works in Milan. And I think there are both similarities and differences in each of the different countries. A lot of the things that we do as an agency here in London, such as being regulars on the climate tech networking scene, our teammates do that as well. As well as climate connections events that we go to on the last Wednesday of every month. We often go to Earthset, which is set up by Fiona Howarth, the CEO of Octopus Electric Vehicles. We also go to Climate Coffee, which Max Bray, one of the co-founders there, has set that up, and that's now rolling out rapidly all around the world. And so actually one of our newest team members, who's based in Berlin, will be at Climate Coffee in Berlin. We'll have Chiara at Climate Coffee in Milan, and then we'll be at the one in London, which is so exciting. And I think, making sure that we're in the right spaces, meeting other interesting startups, supporting our clients. There's sometimes journalists that attend these events as well, so making sure we're networking there is key. I think the Harpswood approach runs through all of the countries in which we operate. So, clear, concise comms, making sure that we're telling stories in the right way that's going to entice journalists. I think also what we're finding is that our teammates in different countries can learn from each other. You know, you can look at a story that's worked really well in one country and then go, how can we replicate that? So we have a session once a week where our whole team joins, and normally we bring one example. So it could be that a client has got a story that we've been really trying to get away and it's not working for whatever reason. So the whole team will jump on and help to troubleshoot it and get inspiration from each other, which is really good to see.
Definitely. I was going to say, I guess on the global side of things, you know, obviously clearly affected by geopolitics and very significant change in the US over the last few months. And I think that is something that Kelly in Houston for us, I mean, she is definitely seeing that it's you have to think carefully about how things are positioned. And I think Texas is a particularly interesting state because, you know, it's obviously the tradition of oil and gas. And I mean, I'm old enough to have watched Dallas, the show in the 80s about oil over there. But I think that it's also important that you remember that it's the biggest state for renewable energy because it's such a huge state. And look, you know, these things are not going to change. Like one president is not going to change the continuing journey of renewables. And I think that's the thing that we keep in mind with Kelly in particular when we're talking to her in Houston, isn't it?
100%. And I think actually when it came to the global expansion, we had some conversations between the two of us of, do we give that opportunity to one of the UK Harpswood teams so they could go out to one of these countries and set up shop out there? And after quite careful consideration and discussion, we thought, hang on, we need media experts in these countries who have those contacts and who, you know, speak the lingo and understand how to cut through and connect with journalists, because our clients come to us because they expect immediate results, right? And so for us to now be able to offer work, we did a really brilliant European and US launch for an EV client quite recently. And it's so exciting for us to be able to offer global support all in-house. I think a lot of agencies have partner agencies overseas, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But I think for us to be able to offer it so that they get the full Harpswood experience, but in different countries, is really exciting.
In a very joined up
100%. But I mean, that said, when we were setting up in the US, I spent about 6 weeks in Houston over that summer interviewing candidates, getting to know the client. And I actually put out a press release myself whilst I was out there, rolling up my sleeves. I remember locking myself in a meeting room and thinking, I'm not getting out of this meeting room until I've managed to set up some interviews for the CEO. And I think I managed, just through a bit of stroke of luck and a bit of determination, probably thrown in for good measure, to get the new FT correspondent for Houston interested in a tour of the client's office. And that meant when our new hire started, I think I had 2 local journalists interested in tours and this FT correspondent, and I lined them all up for her first week. So her first week with us was working with me and shadowing me to understand what I deem as a sort of Harpswood journalist tour and what our levels of expectations are like. So yes, there are differences and there are nuances in each country, but how we run Harpswood, our values, our work ethic, our attitude, how we engage with clients and the media, and the respect that I think we have for the media, I think runs true for all of the countries in which we operate.
Absolutely. And the types of clients that we want to work with, you know, this idea of people who are organisations that are having a positive impact on society.
100%. And I think it's so exciting. You know, we all get together on a Friday. We have something called a weekender, which is where we all jump on a call and we share coverage that the team have achieved for the week, shout outs. We talk about any events that we've been at and any interesting companies that we've met along the way. And I think there is a real mood within the team. You know, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that we believe in the power of positive ideas. And for all of our clients, really, that's where it all started, right? And we see our role as the people that facilitate sharing those ideas out there with the public, helping them to scale as they grow.
And we're coming to the end now. So I want to ask, do you have anything that you want to flag up that's coming up for you, that you want to ask our community, our listeners?
So James and I are actually running a masterclass quite soon, which is really exciting. So that's in partnership with Climate Connection, and it's called Inside the Minds of the Media. And we'll probably be talking about some quite similar things with the group that we've spoken about today, right? Trying to share our collective experience and trying to help demystify things a little bit as well, so that those people considering DIY PR, they've got a bit more of informed knowledge. I think really to the wider audience, it's do you know someone at an interesting company who you think has got a brilliant story to tell, but perhaps they're not yet communicating it widely enough, or you feel it's a bit complicated and they need some help in distilling the message and really cutting through? If so, send them our way. We're a really friendly bunch. We're based in Shoreditch. We're always happy to meet people for a coffee, to have a chat. So do get in touch. Give us a follow also on LinkedIn. We often post about events that we're attending. Like I said, we're regulars on the London climate tech networking scene. Our team in Berlin, Milan and Houston are often out and about meeting people as well in various countries. So if you know anyone in those places, again, do get in touch because we're always happy to meet and have a chat. And then I think the final thing that I would add is we have been looking at over the last year or so how we're shifting from the sort of more traditional PR retainer model to offering a wider variety of services for clients. So we've got some really exciting workshops that we've created. So everything from media training, which of course does what it says on the tin. You know, if you know someone with a great story, but perhaps they're not the most natural or polished communicator, send them to us and we'll spend a half day with them doing interview scenarios. And it's amazing the difference of someone that walks in the morning, by the time they leave at lunchtime after they've had former journalists grilling them, critiquing them, sharing advice, how much more confident and articulate they are and how much better they are at communicating their story by the time they leave is brilliant. We do lots of sessions around how to master your messages, how to get into your founder focus. But equally, I think if a company is listening to this thinking, I've got this specific comms problem and I don't know where to start, don't be afraid to get in touch. We're not adverse to creating something bespoke for someone if there's a need for it.
Yeah, I mean, your question earlier about, at what point is it a good time for a company to start looking at PR? And clearly it's going to come down to budgets. We can be super flexible. We're always looking at people. We want to have impact on this community. We want to help. We want to share our advice. Clearly we're a business as well, but we can see that businesses grow, and we will, as Abby mentioned, media training has been tremendously useful for a lot of organisations that we've worked with. It's been a good way actually for them to dip a toe into the water of the kind of things that we offer. And we want to help as many organisations as we can, and we understand that there are, everyone has budgets to work to, and we love to grow with businesses.
Okay, fantastic. We will have all of the relevant links in the description for this episode. So if you want to get in touch with Harpswood, you know where to go. And I think it's very exciting that you have all of these new masterclasses coming up. And as I said, you can probably meet them at pretty much any London Climate Tech event. They will be there. So thank you so much for your time, guys. It was really, really useful. And if you want to catch more from these guys, you can follow the links. We'll also be discussing the whole world of scaling green technology with more guests in the coming weeks.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.